All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the immediate sparks, the real catalysts that ignited the most devastating conflict in human history, World War II. It's super easy to get lost in the weeds of an event this massive, but today we are going to focus strictly on how the global dominoes first started to fall. We're looking directly at the structural breakdown of why this conflict erupted, tracing the very specific, undeniable actions that ignited a global powder keg. We aren't going to get bogged down in decades of preliminary geopolitics. Instead, we're going straight to the core actions and reactions that fundamentally broke the peace.
Now, 30. Let that number just sink in for a second. Our source material points out that more than 30 countries were eventually pulled into this single massive event. We aren't talking about some minor border dispute that was contained within a few hundred miles. To have 30 distinct nations involved means that literally no corner of the globe was left untouched. It requires a total shift in how we think about human conflict. I mean, this number forces us to realize just how deeply interconnected the world's economies, empires, and alliances had already become by the early 20th century. A shockwave in one capital didn't just rattle its neighbor, it shook the foundations of governments across entirely different oceans and continents.
Section 1. The scale of conflict. So when we classify this as a globally significant event, we're talking about a logistical, political, and human reality that's honestly kind of hard to wrap our modern minds around. Imagine over 30 completely different nations, each with their own complex governments, massive populations, domestic struggles, and unique economic interests, all getting sucked into the exact same violent vortex. How does that even happen, right? Well, it happens because of binding treaties, colonial empires that spanned the earth, and ideological lines that absolutely demanded a side be taken. This staggering level of worldwide entanglement is exactly what makes World War II a foundational event in world history. It wasn't just a war, it was a total restructuring of global civilization.
Section 2. The Polish flashpoints. To understand how that massive global fire actually started, we have to clearly pinpoint the primary catalyst. And looking at our source material, it squarely identifies this catalyst as the aggressive leadership of Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany. This specific regime, driven by an extreme ideology of expansion and militarism under Hitler's absolute control, was the definitive actor that initiated the unprovoked aggression in Europe. Looking at this impartially, the origin point of the military conflict just isn't ambiguous. Nazi Germany's sheer ambition to forcefully redraw the map of Europe was the direct threat that would ultimately drag those 30-plus countries into a state of total war.
And all of this tension builds up to one absolutely pivotal year, the year the world basically tipped over the edge, going from a fragile, anxious peace straight into an unimaginable conflict. 1939. This is a year permanently etched into human history. It represents the absolute turning point of the 20th century. Everything before this year was just the buildup, the diplomatic maneuvering, the growing dread, and everything after it, catastrophic consequence. 1939 is the literal threshold where words and treaties completely failed and massive military force took over. Because in that exact year, Nazi Germany aggressively invades Poland. This specific targeted military invasion is the aggressive action that ignited that global powder keg. This wasn't just some political threat, and it wasn't a diplomatic breakdown in a boardroom. No, this was hundreds of thousands of troops physically crossing a sovereign border. It was the visceral, physical manifestation of the aggression we just talked about. By launching a massive, coordinated attack on Poland, Nazi Germany crossed a definitive line in the sand. They shattered any illusion that peace could be maintained through appeasement and directly initiated a conflict that could no longer be contained. Section 3. The domino effect. Now, you don't get 30 countries involved overnight without a really rapid, structural chain reaction. It's like a giant row of dominoes. Here we see the undeniable cause and effect. An unprovoked aggression is instantly met with a forceful, unified response. On one side, the aggression, Nazi Germany's invasion of Poland. And on the other, the immediate response, Great Britain and France reacting. Why was it so immediate? Because Great Britain and France had drawn a hard line and guaranteed Poland's independence. They actually had mutual defense pacts in place. The source data points out this direct correlation. The aggression prompted Great Britain and France to declare war. It wasn't delayed, there weren't months of endless debate. The invasion of Poland was the absolute threshold that, once violently crossed, legally and strategically guaranteed a wider multi-nation war. It is deeply fascinating and honestly terrifying to trace how incredibly fast this localized invasion spiraled into rapid-fire declarations of war. Notice how every single one of these world-altering steps happens in the exact same year, 1939. First, Nazi Germany invades Poland. Then, in direct response within a matter of mere days, Great Britain declares war on Germany. And practically simultaneously, France declares war on Germany too. This is a rapid, breathtaking escalation. A localized invasion in Eastern Europe instantly morphs into a massive conflict involving three of the largest military and imperial powers on Earth, locking the major players into a fight and setting the permanent stage for total global involvement.
Section 4. The unanswered questions. So, we've established the strict origin point, right? But a true explainer must also look at the massive gaps in the narrative that demand further exploration. Think about it. If the initial dominoes involved just 4 nations, Germany, Poland, Great Britain, and France, how did World War II spread to consume over 26 more? Which countries were actually taking part in it? Grasping the identities, the complicated alliances, and the specific geographic roles of those other nations, from the vastness of the Soviet Union to the Empire of Japan to the eventual entry of the United States, is absolutely critical. We literally cannot grasp the full picture of this global event until we understand how the rest of the world was pulled into the fire. And finally, I want to leave you with this provocative thought about the reality that unfolded right after those historical dominoes fell. But what actually happened during the war? We've explored the catalyst, the invasion, and the political declarations of 1939. But what happens when over 30 nations literally collide in total war? What untold realities, unimaginable technological shifts, and devastating human costs were faced by everyday people on the ground once those declarations were signed? That is the ultimate question we have to ask ourselves to truly grasp the profound and lasting legacy of World War II.